It touches our heart very deeply that you committed personally with the cause of the identification of the unknown soldiers in the Darwin cemetery. Mm-hmm. So thank you very much.
It touches me deeply too.
What made you decide to commit yourself?
Gabby Concifi wrote to me out of the blue. She sent me an email, I think, just telling me the beginnings of the story and saying that she wanted to try it. I think she'd written an article about it. I think she sent me the article that she'd written, actually. But nobody was taking much notice, so she wanted to enlist the help of others to encourage people to pay attention to the predicament of these mothers and fathers, families of these boys who'd been killed in the Malvinas. So, and as you know, who were lying in graves that'd been properly buried and couldn't get permission to send in a Red Cross forensic team to identify them via DNA. So I think the first thing that we did was we went to see Kirchner, who was president then. She said that she would support this initiative, and she did, I have to say.
Such a paradox that it has to be an Englishman asking her to do something about that, about the Argentine unknown soldiers.
Yeah. Well, I'm sort of more of a human being than an Englishman, you know? It doesn't matter really what nationality people are. A mother's grief is a mother's grief. So, and anyway, it proceeded from them. Eventually, I discovered also there was a block from the UK. It wasn't from the UK, I discovered, because I wrote to the Foreign Office. And they said, this has nothing to do with us. This will be decided by the Legislative Council in the islands themselves. So I found out who the chairwoman was. It was a lady called Sharon Halford, and I wrote her a letter. And I think that is the letter that had some effect, because it was quite emotional. What?
That made all the difference.
I don't know, I hope so. She never replied, but we did quite soon after that. The Legislative Council have agreed to allow a Red Cross or an international forensic team in.
How influential was in your decision that your grandfather and your father died as soldiers in the First and Second World Wars?
Well, that's one of the things that I put in my letter to Sharon Halford, in fact, was exactly that. I explained to her about George Henry, my grandfather, who died 23rd of September 1916, and my father, Eric Fletcher, who died February the 18th, 1944, and that I knew that my grandmother and my mother and all the relatives of those men would have been deeply distressed not to know where they were. In fact, my father was never found, but my grandfather is buried at Meroy.
So you don't have a grave to...
No, but there is a memorial at Monte Cassino. There's a Commonwealth War Graves Commission memorial garden. So there is a marble slab with lots of names on it, and one of them. It's in the movie I made called The Wall, actually, because I go and visit it.
So you lost your father when you were only a one-year-old kid?
I was 5 months old. I was born in September. He was killed in February.
So all you have is that symbolic grave. So you do understand very well the mothers of Malvinas, indeed.
Well, yeah, what's to understand? It would be impossible for a human being with a heart not to understand.
There are 102 graves with a name today.
20 to go.
20 to go.
Pretty amazing, the work they've done.
If you could stand by one of the graves at Darwin Cemetery, which would be your words to that soldier that today?
I don't know. I'm glad we know where you are. You're my brother. I'm glad your mother knows where you are more than that I know where you are. It's important to her and your father and your brothers and sisters and cousins, but it's important to me too. It's symbolic of the fact that we care about one another, A, and B, that the national boundaries and particularly in these days with all the talk about immigration, enemies, and oh, it's the Chinese or it's the Muslims or it's the blacks or it's the this or the that or the other. No, it's not. It's the system that is destroying our lives and destroying the world at a huge rate, very, very quickly. This idea that the accumulation of wealth is something to be admired is destroying the planet that we live on.
Would you like to sing in Malvinas?
In the Malvinas?
Yes. Would you like to play the...
Yeah. Yeah, but there's nothing there really but sheep. You know, and sheep are not my best audience.
Years ago,
What?
a friend of mine brought me some grains of sand of Malvinas.
Oh.
I bring it for you.
Oh, thank you
to
so
have
much.
it.
That I will keep that.
It's pure sand from Malvinas.
Fantastic.
I think it was just a little and tiny way of paying homage to your effort as a human being.
Fantastic. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
It's my pleasure. And I was thinking, taking this example of what you did, what Gabriela did, what General Cardoso did, that even in this world where we sometimes fear that as individuals are in front of unstoppable forces and unfathomable uncertainties, sometimes when people decide to make a change, we still can change the world.
Of course. And what we need to discover is this simple thing, the simple thing that if I help my brother and his mother, whoever they are, it doesn't matter who they are, it brings me joy. Accumulating wealth does not make you happy. Helping somebody does. So we need to educate ourselves to understand that in order that we can persuade the people who are running the world.
You've been very critical. You called Bolsonaro a neo-fascist. What are your fears about Brazil's Bolsonaro from now on?
Well, obviously, the unfortunate thing is Bolsonaro will destroy Brazil as fast as he can, and hopefully with a knock-on, just like Trump is doing in the United States of America. Trump is destroying anything that was of any value in America. That's his brief. So immediately he got in power, he put Greg Pruitt in charge of the Environmental Protection Agency. This is a guy who's been fighting and suing the EPA for 20 years on behalf of petrochemical companies. He's put in charge Betsy DeVos, Secretary of Education, and so on and so forth. He has put people into positions of power in every department of government specifically designed to destroy the United States and the rest of the world. It's beyond all of my... Bolsonaro will do exactly the same thing. Now, the first thing he did, the day after he won the election, he announced that Brazil is going to move the Brazilian embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which is like you might just as well light another stick of dynamite and lob it into the Middle East. That's what that is saying. We don't want peace in the Middle East. We have no interest in there ever being any resolution to the Israel-Palestine.
In a point, we seem to be trapped between the far right and the far left.
Yeah.
What do you think of the situation of the humanitarian catastrophe in Venezuela, for example, and the Maduro's regime?
Well, obviously, I think it's tragic. It's tragic, but all the humanitarian disasters all over Latin America and South America in the last couple of years have been tragic. The colonization and the way it was done back then in the day, in the 15th and 16th and 17th centuries, was tragic. We didn't understand then that we're brothers and sisters. The Portuguese treated the indigenous people of Brazil like animals. The Spanish treated the indigenous peoples of all the rest of South America and Latin America as if they were dogs. They gave them they had no rights. They were there to be stolen from and slaughtered.
That's why you invited a Mapuche band to share your
That's
stage.
one of the reasons, yeah. I travel around, I'm lucky enough in my job to travel around the world a lot. And so I have met lots of indigenous people in Australia and New Zealand, but also in Canada. And I've been very involved in Ecuador, helping to fight a legal battle against Chevron.
We are only 5 days to another anniversary of the Berlin Wall fall.
Yeah.
Would you play the wall in the frontier of Mexico and the United States?
Of course. I said that the minute Trump started with his absurd notion of building a wall.
So would you like to do that?
Yeah, I'd love to do it. But only when we get rid of those absurd ideas that you can stop immigration. And the idea that poor people, if there are these massive divisions in wealth in the world, will stop trying to cross barriers in order to earn a living for their families, that mothers and fathers can look after their children, that poor people might ever stop desperately seeking an education for their children, a future for their children. They'll never stop.
Roger,
and neither should they.
Yes.
They shouldn't stop.
The other day, a journalist asked Paul McCartney how he did to be so splendid at the 70s. And he said, it's sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Yeah. Well, he always had a great sense of humor.
So how do you do to be splendid in your 70s?
To feel splendid, I'm lucky. I'm lucky. I have very few but very true and wonderful friends. I have a great woman. I don't know. I've been very, very lucky. I do a job that I really enjoy. I get to go out tomorrow night at La Plata and I've no idea, 50,000 people or something, and sort of feel those huge waves of love coming off the audience.
What does it mean for you to be in Argentina specifically?
Oh, Argentina has a big, big, big place in my heart. You know, we did those wall shows here a few years ago, which were insane at River Plate. I don't know, all over South America, I have to say, and Central America, the audiences are more passionate, more knowledgeable, younger, and generally more satisfying to work with.